Welcome, everybody. Excited to have you back at the advisory and a good session. I'll tell you, this session, a little promotion on this topic on how important it is. We actually have a member who rescheduled their whole flights to make sure that they were going to be here for this session. So it is a really hot topic, the concept of account growth, expansion, renewal, particularly when you think about the time of year we're in right now. We have a lot of companies, a lot of members in the throes of planning for 2020. What's the right resource model? What's the right go-to-market model? So we've just gotten a tremendous response around this topic. We're excited to engage and get the conversation going. I should mention, we looked at all the attendees. We've got global attendees from all over the world coming into the call today. What's interesting, when I looked at some of the sheets that came out on who's here today, I thought it was interesting. We have a real nice blend of folks that are chief revenue officers, the heads of sales, and we have folks in a leadership role around customer success, which is at the heart of this concept of how we have this seamless integration between sales and customer success. So great two perspectives that will be able to come out in our Q&A, hopefully. Let me touch base a little bit with the membership on our agenda today. So as Kasia mentioned, we love when we have members sign up and go through and lead these sessions. And we have two leaders, eminent qualified, to be able to have this conversation on account growth and renewals and customer success. The topic will be, we're going to kind of, as you look at the discussion agenda here, we're going to introduce this model, this acronym. Many of you who have been exposed to TSIA, Technology Services Industry Association, may know of this concept called LAYER, Land, Adopt, Expand, Renew. We'll kind of touch on that, and Chritophe and Mike will talk about that structure. They'll also talk about this concept of a maturity model, recognizing that you have a maturity in your own organization that has a bearing on how you think about these issues around expansion and renewal. And we'll talk about partners and how that role fits and where it fits and at what stage does it fit. So it's going to be, as always, a lively conversation. Excited to have them. Let me go forward and introduce our guests and our hosts. So first, Mike McGuinness. Mike leads all of the global sales, both direct and indirect, for Veracode, leads the customer success function and services function, so it has that full view, end-to-end, of the customer experience, and is a 20-plus leader in this area. We're thrilled to have him. Has launched and ran and led rapid growth environments, so he brings a very unique perspective into our discussion today. And Mike's partner and co-host is Chritophe Bodin, who's Chief Customer Officer at Anaplan. I should mention Mike is Chief Customer Officer at Veracode. So we have two CCOs that bring great experience. For Chritophe, he has a global purview and responsibilities around professional services, customer care, Anaplan Academy, and a 25-year experience looking at the end-to-end process. So what's wonderful is we have two leaders that are out there in the throes of all these concepts that we're about to address today and have that holistic perspective end-to-end going forward. So with that, I will let them start the conversation and get into it, and I'll hand it over to Chritophe.
Thanks, Chad. So what we thought, and no pressure, with people, canceling flight and pushing things. So Mike and I now are in the hot seats, right? So we thought that it would be a good idea just to, set the scene and kind of all agree on what we're talking about here, and apologize for those of us and you who are very familiar with the LAYER format here, but I think it's good to spend just a few minutes on it, right? So LAYER stands for Land, Adopt, Expand, and Renew. So really the four main motions that exist when selling and expanding and renewing in the ecosystem. So I think what's important is, we talk about land and expand, but, renew and adopt are equally important, and adoption phase is where I think that, Mike is going to talk about the role of the CSM here versus in expansion and renewal. So very important for us to set the scene here. And the basic question is, if there is four motions, how many people do you need? Is it one per motion? Is it, people covering two of them? And as usual, and I'm going back to my days as consultant, it depends, right? And that's what we're gonna talk about on how many people need to be on each and any single of this steps and stage as you go forward. So that's what we're going to talk about: land, adopt, expand, renew, and who needs to be involved when, and what are the transition in the phase, and when is it good to have multiple people versus one person end to end looking at this cycle. So over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Chritophe. As we prepared for the session, we were brainstorming on basically the phases. Again, not rocket science, but the idea of a maturity model that companies go through as they progress from what might be a small number of employees to a large number of employees down the road, and how do they approach the layer process. And so obviously, if you're a small company, you might have a single person doing many, if not all, of the roles that we're talking about. At some tipping point, you start to break up those roles and develop the idea of specialization, and move into a second phase. And so as we go through this session, we'd like to engender a conversation about what are those tipping points, and what are the key decisions that you make, and where are the sort of the challenges, either the edge cases or the intersection points that challenge all of us as we think about going through this maturity model, and even once you get to phase 3, even continuing to expand the company going forward from there. So this is generally the framework between layer and the idea of a maturity model that we'd like to set around this discussion. On to the next. There we go.
Yep. So let's talk about transition in one phase to the other, and we'll open up here to all of us to talk about those transition. When we sat down, Chad, Mike, Lisha, and other people, we all thought about, okay, what are the critical things that makes you thinking I need to get to the next phase, right? So for instance, if you talk about phase 1 to phase 2, you're in phase 1, you have, jack of all trade here, and actually there's CSM with a question mark, which, here because we were asking ourselves, do you need a CSM day one? We came with, the thinking that although it may depend on industry, but mostly the answer to that question is yes. So that in very early stage, you need to have some kind of customer success function, very different from the old support paradigm that much more people who are here to make sure that there's adoption, right? So there may be exception to that, but that's where, and then maybe when we open up for debate, then you can chime in on do we need a CSM in phase 1? But let's talk about the transition from 1 to 2. What are the things that create the force to think about, do I need to have a different coverage with account manager versus account executive? And very often you see here the things that are triggering that thought. And the first one is ARR is close to new ACV. So let's explore that for 1 second. That means that at some point, what's coming from existing customer is as important as what's coming from prospects becoming customer. So those things are kind of balancing out, which automatically create the conversation and the thought on, is this 2 different motion? And am I expanding with the same skills than I am opening new accounts? When those 2 things are kind of coming to the same balance point, usually it's point number 3 here, is that you do have a critical mass. We have more sales reps. So suddenly the conversation can happen where it's not about cutting into one person or even splitting into a team of 10. It's you have the mass to really think about, do I need to differentiate the way that I'm getting after new customers, and how do I expand within customer, and what's the difference between the account manager and the CSM, assuming that in phase 2 you do have CSM. And also when you think about customer pyramid and segmentation, which is usually kicking at this transition from phase one and phase two, where companies are starting to segment their go-to-market, and also to expand within existing geos or sub-region, this is where the conversation happens on, hey, do I need different people? Do I need different sales motion? Do I need to have playbooks that are different and that are starting to, share the load amongst different people? So all these things, which are creating actually pain points, and we're going to talk about those pain points as you start, splitting territories and having multiple people and removing accounts from people, and asking CSM to do things that they were not doing in phase one that are slightly much more commercial. I know that there are questions around the cuts between trusted partners and the commercial responsibility, especially in renew and expand, and we'll talk about that. So all those things are kicking in and really pushing us to think about adding a new role in that phase one to phase two. And I don't know, Mike, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would be interested in hearing thoughts on a couple things. So we listed here a handful of, as Chritophe said, trigger points or tipping points where you start to think about more specialization, more separation. Are there other ones that we missed? And then I'd be interested in getting people's opinions on that first question that you threw out there, Chritophe, which is, when do you need a CSM? If you think about, forget about the total number of employees in the company, but when you are going to market, is the CSM a role that you should have as you go to market? Is it something that you can remember? It's always a dynamic between budget and the ideal experience. But when do you bring on that first CSM resource, and what does that resource look like? Those are kind of interesting things I'd love to get some thoughts on.
Yeah, this is Dion. Maybe I'll comment on the first part. Yeah, I guess, so first of all, I love this discussion. The way I've always kind of looked at it, and I think that you guys have said it this way, I'll say it maybe a little differently, is determining what roles we need to touch the customer. I generally start with what are the activities that need to take place in order to renew and expand, versus the roles, because I kind of find like if I list the activities, then I look at what are the skills needed to execute the activities. That seemed, and I've done this like 3 times now in companies that are really complex software and really simple software. And the net result is pretty different if you look at it more from key activities, then map it to the skills you need to execute the activities. And then I also usually rank like, what are the activities that you need to do every day versus the activities you need to do once in a while? Because if it's a once in a while activity to renew and expand an account, that's where you'd want to create more of a specialist pool team versus a team. If it's an everyday activity, then you want real roles with focus and comp plans that are associated with it. Just another kind of maybe way of thinking about how to kind of get to the same outcome. Right. And then the other thing is adoption complexities, you guys know, matters a lot. And you guys mentioned that, like, if it's a really simple solution and all you need the seller to do is drop in for QBRs twice a year and a CSM can run 95% of the motion, then I don't think you need an account manager in any phase. But if it's complicated where the motion, and you said this, the motion is very different to renew and expand versus sell land, then unfortunately, yeah, you got to build this parallel sales team, which is really expensive, but is needed, right? So I think of adoption complexity as another vector that I generally kind of look at in the evaluation.
Yeah, so continuing to build the value with the customer.
Yeah, you're saying something, Diane, that is super important here, and that we talked about it during our prep, but then it would have complexified the model and the slide here. There's the company maturity, there is the product complexity, as well as the adoption complexity, right? So then those things, then you can, maybe the renewal specialist comes into phase 2, and you don't have an account manager, to your point. But I think what we're trying to say here is that there's really those 5, and Mike is going to talk about the phase 2 to phase 3, so I don't want to get ahead of our skis here. But we have those 5 functions, and depending on the maturity of the company, the kind of product, and how easy or hard it is to adopt, and how much you rely on the land and expand, really a big motion, then those things are slightly interchangeable, but they're really point where you have to ask yourself the question, even if the question is, okay, I don't need it, right? But it's like when you have as much revenue as new stuff coming in, it's fair and sane to ask ourselves the question, do I need something else? Even if the answer is no. When Mike and I discussed, it was like, well, we're not forcing ourselves to ask the question, because it's painful to go from one phase to another. It is always painful, as every change, right?
It also depends. It's Roberto here. I think what's your cost/revenue model, right? From the land and expand. Obviously, if you start introducing the account manager versus a CSM, you got to figure out a way what motivates those people to, right? So what's the cost of that renewal or that land? The land, you expect that to be very expensive because this is difficult. Getting this adoption, an account manager. So for me, the role of account manager versus CSM has come up many times, but what I saw more as an issue, this is as a parallel track to what you guys are talking here, which I like, is more this idea that if I need more help in this phase 2 to just drive this adoption, more than adding an account manager, what I needed to do is to add a new role that is similar to what a pre-sales engineer does on a pre-sales, more like into this phase, i.e. having someone, I call that a customer success engineer, so to speak, but having someone that is not trying to land something new technically, not a demo jockey, so to speak, but someone who's really going to work hand in hand with this CSM to make sure that what has been landed or sold is really successfully being adopted technically down the trenches with our customer. To your point, Dan, it has to do also with the fact of complexity. If your product is not complex, you don't need that. But if this is complex, I think I saw that more as, for me at least, more important as account manager. I saw this need of adding someone who's not a consultant, someone who's not paid out by the hour, someone who doesn't have a quota to sell new, but highly technical, who can help the CSM making sure things happen.
Yeah, the interesting question there, Roberto, is if you have a complex deployment model or success model, is that a characteristic of the customer success manager? So what's the difference between that customer success engineer and the customer success manager? And do you need both, and can you afford both?
Well, and that's a good question. And I think this is why I was just saying the same thing as Dan. If you don't need both, you have a pool of resources you draw from when you need them, if it's not needed all the time. Okay. But to me, certainly, I've seen an evolution where I do need those CSMs initially, they can do both. But if they're too technical, they're not going to do the other piece we want, which is making sure that the adoption happens and or the programmatic.
Which is the program management part,
Yeah, and so you kind of split the role, but where I always find myself short is I manage consulting too, but they're on a billable hour. So unless you just sell the consulting ahead and you know already what projects you're going to run, you can use your consulting team. But sometimes it's almost like going to a doctor. I know I'm sick as a customer, but I don't know exactly what the pill is yet. So I just need someone to just sit down with me and look over my shoulder as I work and be this technical advisor who's gonna just do. I call this adoption lead generation. just create the opportunity for the customers to be successful with the solution.
Yeah, and Mike, this is Somesh here. I sort of extend Roberto's thoughts. So I come from a background where we had license model as well as SaaS. And when you have complexity in the solution, as well as you try to figure out where in the journey you are, you probably need to look at your customer segmentation, with Christopher referred to, with a different lens. So what we did is we looked back before putting the CSM function in terms of, let's segment our customers into what I call A for acquire, D for develop, and R for retain. Because retention is also a very critical element as you focus on a lot of empowerment of customers on feature functionality and product adoption. There comes a time where you start seeing customer churn, and you need to look at also customers where there is less white space, but retention is equally important. So I think CSM sometimes is right at the dichotomy between sales and support. You really need to make sure that you have the right investments where they are engaging the customers and making sure it's truly land and expand, so to speak.
I think, Somesh, you're spot on, and that's what we were trying to say with the customer pyramid, that is forcing us to think about there's different roles, and now I'm starting to differentiate different people and doing different things at the customer. Now I think we need not to be too much hung up on the naming and convention, right? Behind account manager, depending on the product, depending on what you're trying to achieve, or having hybrid model between on-prem and SaaS, as you were just talking about, then the account manager can turn into something called, I mean, for those of us in that business for a long time, into a technical account manager. And the difference between those two is whether you have a bag or not, right? Whether you carry a quota. It's still somebody who is here managing the accounts and making sure that not only gets adopted, but there is more opportunities being created out of the motion, right? So I think we're all saying the same thing, which is because of the customer pyramid, because of the importance of the revenue that is coming from existing customers, because I'm starting to get more reps, and now I have the critical mass, then the conversation become relevant of having the differentiation of functions. Now, whether they all the quota or not, whether they the part of transaction or not, then kind of depends on exactly who each and every single of us is as a company, and I think it's totally fine.
Right.
There's with nuances.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, one other point before we maybe move to this slide, but one other point regarding that first tipping point for going from phase 1 to phase 2, and it's a little bit of the reverse view, right? We've talked about doing it because of the growth of the customers, the importance of renewals, maybe even the importance of expansion, and so we need that specialization. But putting my head of sales hat on, if I think about a company that's growing and hits a certain ARR level, chances are next year the new ARR, the new land number that I'm carrying is also a pretty big number.
Yep.
And so how do I take the resources that I've got, which are finite, that have proven to be adept at landing in my market, and how do I strip away anything that is not focused on land from them so that they can maximize the amount of land that we generate, and then while still maintaining a great experience for the customers and renewing and expanding. So tipping from phase 1 to phase 2 is not just driven on how much customer success and renewal and expansion activity we need, but it's also driven by how much land activity we need and how do we optimize the resources that are doing that.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right, so if we move to the next slide, so kind of the question although we touched already on some of it, but really wanted to open the dialogue here on the challenges that we all facing when we move from phase 1 to phase 2. I think I'm going to reach out to you, Roberto, because I know that you exchange email with Kasha yesterday, and you had a great question around the loss of the trusted advisor in some changes. So sorry to put you on the spot here, but I think that when I read your email, I was like, wow, this is a great question. Let's talk about that.
I said, you said it all. I think it is always like you have to find this balance, right? So I think, you have this tension where you want people to be sales savvy, you want to generate leads, but there is a fine line you don't want to cross. If you start crossing that line a bit, and well, there's something pretty good about when you have like a good CSM and a good salesperson working the account together. You kind of like know how that magic works, but they kind of, it's a role play, and you don't want to cross the line. So and the temptation is there, because when you can do small expand. I mean, I don't want to go to phase 3 already, but when you start trying to do more than what you're supposed to do, just like it becomes a salesperson in sheep, like a wolf in sheep's clothing, so to speak, right? So you want to be careful with that.
Right, and the customers can sense that pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, very quickly.
That's very, right. Very, very. And I think that's what's, the big differentiation, I think, between CSM and the rest of what we had on the slide is right there, right? So as soon as the CSM is perceived as not a trusted advisor anymore, this is where the confusion is coming in, and that the customers will backpedal and not being open up, right? So that's a line that needs to be carefully, I think, maintained. That's why I think, without jumping into what Mike is going to cover, this is why you have the renewal specialist coming in, because you want somebody who's handling the transaction itself, was really the commercial harm of this last 5 yards, even if at times it's more than 5 yards, and it's more complex than just pushing that across the line, but it's really making sure that there is no confusion, because otherwise then the customer, then bad things happen, right? To your point, Roberto.
So this is Lori Hart. I'm kind of curious how you're incenting, based on what you said about the trusted advisor for the CSM, which I completely agree with. So how do you look at measuring a CSM versus, say, a renewals rep or a renewal specialist? So renewal specialists, I would think, would be, have a ARR, or depending on your product line, bookings or ACV number on the renewals, but then how are you measuring the CSM so they really stay a trusted advisor versus, maybe trying to quote unquote sell to the customer?
So, and I'm sure that Mike will, when we prepared for this, Mike and I, that's why I'm kind of smiling, come to an agreement that if we touch at some point the notion of compensation, then we're going to open another all conversation and another all meeting. I think we can spend an hour on comp and metrics and how to drive the right behavior. So, but to participate to the conversation here, I don't think that there is anything bad in compensating CSM on renewal or lead that they're generating in terms of expansion, as long as it's not a quota per se, right? So is it the team that they belong? But at the end of the day, the best proof of the customer adopting and realizing the value is the fact that that person is renewing, number one, and number two, that there's a desire to expand, versus things like net promoter score, customer sat, which I remember 10 or 15 years ago it was the panacea, but then people understood that actually at time somebody can be positive and still churn. So I think the main demarcation line here is really the notion of quota as well as a percentage, right? It's not only about the metric, is how much is at risk and at stake, right? So typically 50-50 in the sales world, then I think that there's nothing wrong in compensating CSM on renewal as long as it's in a reasonable percentage. TBD what this reasonable percentage, but would offer around 20-25 versus the 50% that is typical of a sales plan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if I can add something here, Laurie, at least for me, we can go back and forth. We all started with like advanced support metrics, right? Like activity-based as opposed to outcome. I think that you don't want them to be, I like to have them sales-y, but not sales. That's why I go for net retention, right? So there's an idea that you need to grow. And if you lose some, you have to going to grow somewhere. So this idea that, yes, growing an account is important, driving adoption and growing the relationship is important. So 50% of the variable part being around a number, a net retention dollar value for CSM, and the other part being just still on the activities, because you want to make sure that the good hygiene happens with your customers and the value is realized for them on an ongoing basis. When it comes down to the renewal specialist, I think that it is more just hardcore metrics about quota, but less leveraged anyway, and just like a process stuff, so to speak. It's I don't like to today, at least I don't expect much renewal specialists to do very advanced nurturing of caring of customers. It's more transactional.
Right. I think it's more about the like end quarter renewal rates and things like that for renewal specialists.
That's exactly right. That's about like, and also win back programs for those you lost, right? And all those kind of great metrics of call center like or telesales almost.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a great sideways to your next slide, Mike.
All right, great. So, and just looking at the clock management part here, we've got probably about 15 or so minutes left of this part of the program. So we'll try to stay tight to that. And so we've got listed here another handful of things that might trigger a move from phase 2 to phase 3. And or you might consider even as you're in phase 2 and phase 3. So you've gone from 1 or 2 people, like obviously there's more roles here. There would be an SE type of pre-sales SE in phase 1 likely, and now in phase 2 you've moved where you've got some segmentation between the landing of the customer and the renewing and expanding of the customer. And then as you start to get a little bigger, there's some trigger points that might get you thinking about a phase 3, and you could argue that phase 3 is takes you forever, or that there's even a phase 4 out there. But now you start thinking about what does the customer pyramid look like? Somewhere in late phase 2, phase 3, you might realize that you've got a small number of very large customers or prospects that you want to approach in a certain way. So you start to segment the customer pyramid. You could choose, does that tip top of the pyramid, are they relationship owners, and they certainly do land or renew and expand. They could do, if they're also excellent landers, and I've found that sometimes when you find people there, they need that or want that as part of their motivation. So they want to be able to go out and crack some new, bigger customers while maintaining and growing the relationship that they have with some of the earlier customers. And so do they do all of the things? Do you have a segment of them that do only account management? As you get more sales reps, you're carrying more quota, you're segmenting it more finely between land, expand, and renew. You've got the opportunity now, because you have a little more density, to layer in more specialty. You could go based on industry. You could go based on geography. You can go based on size. And most companies these days do some or all of those, depending on how much of the pyramid they're approaching. You might also find that your phase 3, as an example in North America, but phase 1 in Latin America, or phase 2 in EMEA, and phase 3 in North America, if you're a North American headquartered company. And so that's a dynamic where you're managing or one organization that is made up of 2 different segments that are in different phases.
Because I think you could only afford, for example, I mean, phase 3 for like global accounts, I mean, they'd have to be really huge accounts, whereas, you know, phase 1 would be more of a commercial segment, and, or as you said, geographies that are just more emerging or something like that, or you're just getting less business there.
Yeah, when we talk about phase 3 here, we talk about it as a company, and it means that you would have the ability to have the role of a key account executive or key account manager that does, in fact, address that small number of very large global accounts that are either already customers or are super well suited to what you do, and you want to take an approach that is targeted and long term and global. But within the organization, you also have customers from the middle part of the pyramid, maybe even from the small part and the lower part, and you might have different teams. I think the idea behind phase 3 is greater specialization within the company.
Yeah, Mike, I think you spelled it very correctly. So like in my context, it probably has phase 3 has multiple facets, as Chritophe alluded earlier. It's not one size fits all. So where we have emerging markets or verticals, we do have the top account segmented with a key account manager, but there is a renewal specialist. In others, probably, we don't have a key account manager because of the segmentation. So it's pretty much based on the maturity model.
Right. And as you add layers, as you segment the pyramid, it gets more complicated for the whole company. So if the go-to-market model slices the pyramid into 6 horizontal bars, then how does marketing work with you to address those 6 horizontal bars? So there's a lot of thought that goes in, because it's not just how do I organize my revenue generation team. It's how do I also allow all the teams that support that go-to-market function to organize and generate activity, track their data, and just become better and better at it.
Yeah, true. Well said. And of course, with that planning and looking at these different dimensions, you also need to make sure there's no channel conflicts. Channel conflicts are healthy. It shows there are positive signs, but you need to make sure that you avoid those.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. We'll talk about that in a few seconds, but as if it was not already complex enough, then you have the channel kicking in, right? Are you selling direct versus indirect? When is it that you're doing inside sales versus field sales? I think in the conversation that Mike and I had, the main thing is it has to be a conscious process, right? And that recognizing that even within the same company, you can have places where you phase 1, places you're phase 2, and places where you're phase 3, which means that you're a phase 3 company. Then making all those choices consciously versus them happening to you under a threat or simply because the market is pushing you, right? So what Mike and I discussed offline was, hey, it really needs to be a continuous process where you're challenging yourself all the time, saying, when is it that, am I at the point where I need to move that part of my business into the next phase? Or is the company itself moving from one phase to another? Because the cost of not doing it is probably huge, right? Because you're missing all those opportunities, and this is where at time you get stuck in one phase and you start to plateau your revenues because basically you keep doing the same thing and you get, of course, the same results.
One question that I have, as when I think about phase 3, there's 2 new roles that have appeared here in phase 3. One we call the key account manager. I would say that could be key account manager, key account executive. But then also this is where the renewal specialist appears. And obviously you're bringing in a renewal specialist to optimize your renewal rate, so the dollars you generate from renewal, but what other things, if you had a dedicated renewal team, would you ask of them? That while you're executing your job of hopefully renewing at a very high percentage, we'd also like to see the following things occur in our interaction with the customer. An example would be removing special terms from a contract that were put there to land the customer. So at the time it was a hot point, but now 1 year, 2 years, 3 years later, you're at renewal. Is there a chance for us to clean up that contract and just make it easier to manage? Are there other things like that you've seen value from a dedicated renewals team?
Well, we're in the process of setting this up, so it's a little bit early for us at NetApp, and this is Lori Harmon again, by the way. So what we were looking for, in addition to, as you said, like the end quarter renewal rate, is lowering the discounts. And that could be contract related, like maybe they have a contract with a fixed discount, or maybe it's just bad habits from the account manager historically using renewals as a way to discount to solve many other ills. And so I think that's really key. And also, of course, identifying customers at risk, which could mean they're moving from our on-premise type products or to a more cloud type of products or to a competitor. So we want them to identify that, to roll that back to the account manager or account executive to see if there's either a new opportunity or, of course, an opportunity to make sure we don't lose that customer. So those are the primary things we're looking for.
Great.
Our renewal specialist.
Great. Yeah. So cleaning up discounts and also having some, given that, as I think Chritophe or Roberto mentioned before, they're not necessarily people skilled at sort of reselling or generating value. But if we could give them a guide, a customer health guide maybe, and in the course of their engagement with the customer, they can look to check boxes and say, this customer is healthy, or this customer might not be as healthy as you think, and raise it to other people's attention.
Right. Or, identify for us new opportunities to, like, maybe they're okay, but they want to expand to cloud. So it's retention, risk, and also new product expansion. But you're right. They're not going to close that. Right. They're just going to, quote unquote, pass that lead to the appropriate person.
There's something that Mike said, which I think is super important. And I've seen working with renewal specialists, is all this contract quote unquote cleanup or monetization of non-financial terms within a contract.
Right.
And usually these people are actually really good at that. And it can ranges from discount, as you were discussing just a few seconds ago, to public reference. And so all those things that don't come naturally at the time of land, because you're onto something else. You're here focusing on, I want to make sure that this account stays in and becomes a customer, or in the pure expand where you're fighting to get another product in a different line of business, or move from prem to SaaS, for instance. The renewal specialist can really add value at time of renewal to either clean up or monetize non-financial terms. I've seen that really working well.
Yeah, I like the asking for a public reference. That's a really good, that's a new one. I'm going to add that to my list.
Right.
And Mike and Chritophe, as Lori alluded to, I call them the 3 R's, which is risk, retention, and referenceability. So my renewal team is tasked with the referenceability target as well. So they can start planning, years and months ahead to identify customers at risk, and retention and price comparison. And of course, referenceability, which has paid us very well.
How do you guys introduce the renewal specialist? So we're actually just hiring the first one, and just our context is the CSM is the adoption quarterback for us. But because we're hiring a new breed of CSMs, because we realize we have to really focus their activities more on adoption, not just commercial, the CSMs I'm bringing are like, I don't want a quota. I don't know to negotiate the last mile. And 99% of their work is around adoption. So the way we were thinking of it, but love your feedback, because I've actually not done a renewal specialist. I've always had an account manager, but our motion's a lot simpler here. Is like, the way we're thinking of it is the CSM kind of like the customer looks at them as a trusted advisor, And then as like 90 days before the renewal, they say, oh, great, your renewal's coming up. You know, let me introduce you to John, who is in our process, the one who's responsible for working with you on the renewal. Like, I'd love your feedback on like timing and how do you introduce that role?
So I think some of that, that's dependent on the market segment. So for example, what we're going through now is we're doing this in our enterprise segment. I mean, we have, just so you know, we have global segment, we have an enterprise segment, we have a name commercial and a non-name commercial. So we have 4 segments on the pyramid here. And the first thing is talking to the leader of the enterprise team, right? Making sure he or she is bought into the program in terms of what we're trying to do. And it's a transition. So the account managers still has a renewals quota. They're keeping the quota, but we're positioning this as, hey, we're going to offload this work from you so you can go sell more product. You still have quota, you still get compensated. We're going to help you. And over time, we're likely going to, you know, either reduce their quota or reduce the compensation. We still want to keep them in the loop because they really have the account ownership. And so we're starting by doing a pilot with just a few renewal reps, and then we work out the bugs on that. And then we're starting to do an expansion across. We're starting in the Americas, and then we're going to do a global expansion. But I think having the buy-in of the field leader of the segment you're going into is really critical. So they support you and they make sure that their account managers or account executives are bringing you your renewal specialist into those accounts so they can start establishing a relationship. I wouldn't go cold turkey is my advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think sorry, go ahead, Dion.
No, just I was from a customer facing perspective though too, like how do you present it to the customer and what's the timing of it before the renewal?
Well, I think you introduce them to customers, one of your teammates, right? ASAP, right? Because you don't really want to just talk to them 90 days in advance. You want to have an ongoing dialogue of some cadence with the customer, because otherwise they know it's just like, hey, they're just here to sell us this thing and we haven't talked to them in a year.
No, but our CSM is a monthly cadence. That's what I mean.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's just procurement. So I'm trying to understand, when do we introduce procurement into the cycle? Yeah.
I think, Diane, you mentioned the magic 90 days, which seems to be kind of the industry standards. Unfortunately, as every industry standards, it's only an average. And I would challenge the 90 days actually. It depends on, and then I will go with what Lori, I think you said, which is in certain instances, it's all the time. It's like, it's the day after you landed that you need to start having a renewal conversation almost, right? So I would strongly encourage that. 90 days seems to be what it was for years and years, but I think it's challenged by the new business models and the move to SaaS, and in our case, for instance, we moved from 90 days to actually 180.
Me too.
Right. So because
I just moved to 180 as well, because I think to your point, Christophe, 90 days, if you find that an account is in trouble, there's not much time.
No, you guys, but what I'm asking is the CSM is engaged immediately and they have a monthly cadence with the customer. Value.
We have the same thing. It's just that we in our case the CSM is introducing the renewal manager. That's the way we call them at 6 months prior, because to Roberto's point, even on the contractual conversation, 90 days is too late.
Mm-hmm. Well, so our approach is similar. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Roberto.
No, I think, John, to the point is on the top. Depending on your segmentation, as Laurie was saying, there is a point somewhere in your most important account where you have a CSM ratio. I use 1 to 5 customers. It's roughly $5 to $6 million each, and the CSM knows everything. Those customers typically are not at risk over renewal. Well, I was talking more about this 90 days. It's more like it's for my accounts where I have like the CSM program is so widespread. I call this an inside CSM program, where you really don't have time to be familiar to all your customer. You're relying more into tools to understand if they're falling behind in adoption and signs of trouble to get a CSM to be involved. A different type of CSM, maybe who doesn't travel. That's why I call them inside CSMs. But a great way to get an early warning system is if you call like really all your customers 6 months before renewal, if you haven't heard from them in a while, if they're really telling you, yes, I'm not sure, I've not used it, I'm not sure how I'm going to stay around or whatever, at least you got 6 months. You can assign that to a CSM, but it's not a perfect science.
Yeah.
Better than 90 days for me, at least.
So Roberto, I'm curious,
Yeah.
you said 5 million.
Our,
So is that like $1 million per account or 5 million per each of the 5 accounts?
It's 5 million total. That's what I do on ARR.
Thank you.
Yeah, got very similar.
Sorry. So Chad, just looking at the clock, I'm going to recommend that we, do a schedule. We schedule a session for this exact topic, but in a channel-based model, because I think it could actually. I mean, we have one slide for that, but I think that could be a whole session and interesting.
A couple of hours on that one.
Yeah, I agree. That's
and especially a mixed model where you do some direct and some through channel. And how do you make sure you don't step on your channel partner's toes while you're running, effectively two parallel procesries?
Yeah, maybe if you can just jump to the slide just to introduce the topic, right? Because it's where everything, and it can be an hour conversation. Where can you just jump to the slide?
It's a great group of people, guys. I love
this one here, right? So it's like partners, right? Where do they play? Are they involved? In adopt and expand and renew. I think we can spend another hour just on that topic altogether, right? So
yeah, because you have different partners, right? Some of them are involved in services, some aren't. It's complicated.
Right. You've got some partners who the original deal went through, but let's say it was a 3-year deal and the customer hasn't talked to them in 3 years. So does the customer even still know who they are or want to buy through them? Other partners, they're very involved, and how do you, as an example, tell a renewal specialist how should they interact with that situation starting 100 days out, 180 days out?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was
so yeah, Chad, you want to take the ball from here?
I do. I just want to thank, on behalf of everyone, because it's been such a great session with the organic questions and back and forth. So Mike and Chritophe, thank you guys so much for obviously hitting a topic that has a lot of energy around it. And Mike, I think we will definitely take your idea, because we've already been talking to Roberto about having a session with the partner dynamic. So I'd love to combine that into another session that we define collectively as a community. And spend some more time with it. But again, on behalf of everyone, because we've gotten great chats coming in, more questions coming in, we'll make sure we get those out. But for Mike and for Chritophe, greatly appreciate you guys leading the session today and bringing your perspective and expertise to the issue around account growth and renewals. Probably, team, what I'll do is just close with a couple of key points. We always like to honor the 1 hour. We know that each of you has many commitments throughout the day, so we covet the fact that you take time to be part of the advisory ecosystem. What I would like to mention here is that Bain & Company is a member of the advisory ecosystem along with you, and they have recently published some research called B2B Customer Value that was profiled in the Harvard Business Review, has about 1,000 plus B2B customers that were surveyed. And what they've done is they've identified these 36 elements that customers look to experience value beyond functional value, beyond is it helping me reduce cost or is it helping me make money or mitigate risk, but things like ease of doing business, things like individual value, things like inspirational value. How are you aligning to a key account around a shared view of success? So just a very quick synopsis on that. They've taken all that research and they've allowed members in this community to have access to it. And so Ecosystems has ported all of that content into an interactive platform. And so I just want to make sure all members are aware we'll be reaching out to you individually to show you that content, the Bain content and research, and brainstorm if and how it could help you in baselining value with key accounts or be another indicator or vector into account health for you. That'll be something that we look to do in the weeks to follow after our session. We have a little process flow here. I won't go through every block with you, just suffice to say, We'll set up some one-on-one time, show you the Bain content. Probably the most compelling part of their content is they show of these 36 elements of value. If you as a provider break threshold on 6 or more elements, this is kind of a screenshot of the platform. If your customer rates you in a high scoring on 6 or more elements, they've seen a correlation impact to customer loyalty and account growth. So there's some real nice, robust research around it. And again, we'll make sure that that's available to each member. Feel free to reach out to me or Kasha, or we'll reach out to you to schedule the one-on-one time. Finally, I just wanted to talk to you. Our session and our community is growing at light years, and we have more and more topics. Obviously, the point about the partner component to account growth and renewals is something we're going to be putting in place. We've got topics around monetization of customer success, sales transformation, the evolving role of the partner, outcome-based agreements. Some of our members are actually kind of wading into that water, some of that early discussions on how that works and what they're seeing. Automation of the sales and customer success function, how we have a more elegant handoff between those two, and organizational alignment. These are just kind of an illustrative example of some of the content pieces that are coming up for 2020. I would say also, just as Chritophe and Mike have done, folks that have listened to this, Grad did it, the leader of HP as a service on our prior session, feel free to engage. If there's something that's really energizing you on a topic that you feel the members would love to hear from you about and you'd like to co-host a session, we're actively asking for those hosts to come join us and start the efforts in preparation going forward. So I think we're at the top of the hour. We will wish you a great day, and we'll follow up individually. Thanks all.